Hi all, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through the first 5 books that I've read in the month of February, so let's just get started. I'm going to go through these books in the order in which I've read them, although in my February end of month wrap up I will go through them in the order in which I ranked them from least to most favorite. So starting with a book that I finished, I think actually on the 1st of the month, if not on the 2nd of the month, was Latitudes of Longing by Shubhangi Swarup. This one was on my January TBR as a reading woman prompt, as this fulfilled the challenge to read a book longlisted for the JCB prize, which is a literary fiction prize out of India, and this was longlisted in 2018, which was when it was originally published in India, and it was published here in the US in 2020. So this one is kind of like a set of interconnected short stories. We follow 4 different long form stories. Most of them are between 50 and 100 pages, and each of them follows a character or a set of characters, and then one of the side characters from the previous story is the main character of the next story, which is usually a setup that I like in novels. I enjoy seeing a character who we've met previously kind of explored fully in a later part of the novel or in a different short story if it's a short story collection. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this novel. I also enjoyed the stories. I think they were really interesting and they portrayed India and its geopolitics in ways that were really interesting and new to me. I also found this novel used a lot of kind of geology and ecology in a lot of its kind of metaphors, but also in just the writing in general. So there was a lot of kind of nature-ish writing in here that I appreciated. I think the way that geology and change was used as a metaphor to talk about a lot of relationships was really well done. And if you are a fan of nature writing and kind of using the land as metaphor, I think you would enjoy this book. However, my main gripe with it, and it wasn't necessarily a critique of the book itself, but much more a kind of limitation of me as a reader, was that all 4 of the stories here discuss in depth some aspect of kind of geopolitics in the South Asian subcontinent, most of which I was not really familiar with going into this novel. So there was a lot of parts of the novel that I just felt very confused. However, I think that was more because this novel was written for an Indian audience and not necessarily an American audience. So there's a lot discussed here that I think someone who is more abreast of Indian politics and the kind of geopolitical machinations that are happening in the region, particularly in Kashmir and Nepal, and also what is currently happening in Myanmar. I finished this book at the beginning of the month, and then I listened to the Up First podcast from NPR, and I remember when I heard the story about Myanmar and the coup that took place during the middle of this month, I think. I honestly can't remember when that happened, but that actually helped contextualize a lot of what is happening in this book, because it talks about the previous military regime that was present in the 1970s. That's one of the storylines here, which I was not super familiar with upon reading this book, but looking back on it, I understand more of what this book was trying to do with those narratives. And then the first story takes place in the Andaman Islands, which honestly I'd never heard of before I started this book. So it was definitely a learning experience for me of understanding and getting a better sense of some of the kind of geopolitical issues with India and the surrounding countries from an Indian person and the perspective that they have on these issues. However, since I have such a total lack of knowledge of a lot of these issues, I think a lot of what this book was trying to do was kind of lost on me. But I did enjoy the writing and its use of the natural world. So overall, I enjoyed it. I don't think it will really stick with me, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Then the next book I finished for my book club that I do with 2 of my best friends, and we read The Patron, Saint of Liars by Ann Patchett. I believe this is Ann Patchett's debut novel. It came out back in 1992, I think, and I really enjoyed this one. I think this novel explores a lot of the themes that Ann Patchett works with in her later books, particularly Commonwealth and The Dutch House, which are 2 of my other favorites of hers, and both of which I think are her 2 most recent novels. I think a lot of those themes of family and family secrets and the kind of relationships that are changed and transformed by kind of the uncovering of those secrets or by the secrets themselves, I think are really present in this novel, and you can see her kind of early grapplings with those ideas and the relationships of family really well in this novel. This is a literary historical fiction novel that takes place in the 1960s, and we follow in the first third of the novel our main character Rose, who is a young woman. She is recently married to a very nice man. There's really nothing wrong with him. He's not abusive or anything, but she is still unhappy in this relationship. She feels kind of very trapped, I think, by the limitations of just being a housewife in the 1960s. So when she learns that she's pregnant, she actually leaves without really telling anyone to go to a home run by a group of Catholic nuns in rural Kentucky that is for unwed mothers that want to have their baby and then give it up and then kind of return to their life. And so she decides that she is going to go there and pretend to be an unwed mother herself, despite the fact that she is actually married. And she develops a lot of relationships with the other women there, as well as some of the nuns, and actually ends up staying there and continuing to help out with the kind of logistics of running the home. So then shortly after she has her baby, we then switch for the second third of the novel to a man named Sun, who she develops a relationship with in her section of the novel. And Sun also kind of deals with a lot of the maintenance of keeping up with the home, and we follow him and get his backstory in the second third of the novel. And then the final third follows Rose's biological daughter Cecilia and her life living at the house, and also we as the reader get to see how little she knows about her parents and their kind of histories, which I found to be really interesting. So I really enjoyed this book. I think the way that it's structured, that allows the reader to know a lot more than the characters do, is really valuable for the story it's trying to tell. I also found, again, the explorations of family and secrets and the way that those two things interact, and the way that secrets impact how we relate to one another was all really well done. The other people in my book club also really enjoyed this one. It definitely fostered a lot of conversation about some of the kind of more metaphorical aspects of this novel, which I really appreciated. So if you're looking for a very backlist novel to talk about in like a book club setting, I would probably recommend this one. So I gave this one 4.5 stars, would definitely recommend it, particularly if you are a previous fan of Ann Patchett and have not picked this one up. I definitely think that this is a very strong debut novel. Then another debut novel that I read this month that was less of a success for me was History of Wolves by Emily Fridlund. This is one of the books that's been on my TBR for the absolute longest, so I'm glad that I finally got to it this month. And honestly, it was fine. I don't think it'll be particularly memorable. This follows a young woman named Linda who is about 14 or 15, living in the very northern part of Minnesota, Northwoods region of Minnesota, which is a place I've spent a little bit of time. It's definitely very beautiful, but there's also a lot of very impoverished people that live there. There's not a lot of really anything going on up there except for logging and iron ore mining that the people in the Twin Cities don't want to happen. But anyway, I digress. So this novel follows Linda, who is a high school student, doesn't really get along with a lot of other people, very much a loner in her high school, and she develops a relationship with a family that has just moved in, who are originally from Chicago but have built this house here on the lake in very northern Minnesota. And it's a mother of a young child whose name is Paul, who's only about 4, and the mother does have a husband, but he is gone very frequently because he is an astrophysicist, I remember correctly. And so Linda begins to kind of babysit Paul and help out around the house because the mother is obviously very overwhelmed. And the story takes a very disturbing turn from there that I don't want to spoil in case you are interested in reading this book, that I was kind of expecting, because there's a sense of unease whenever the three of them are together that I definitely think builds as we get to the kind of culminating moment in this book. I also found the descriptions of this landscape to be really well done. Emily Fridlund lives in the northern part of Minnesota, and so she's very familiar with this part of the country, and so I think that was also done well and also helped to add to the sense of kind of unease and isolation that's felt throughout this book by all of our characters, really. I will say there were a few additional threads aside from the kind of relationship of Linda, Paul, and Patra that I didn't really feel like went anywhere and weren't entirely necessary. This book also jumps back and forth through from the past timeline, that's our main central timeline of the book, of Linda being 14 or 15, to a much older Linda who's kind of recounting the story, and I thought that was done okay. For me to really enjoy a kind of dual timeline narrative like that, particularly if the narrator is discussing an event that was really kind of important to them that happened in the past, I either like it to be kind of like The Secret History, where we never get any of the present day timeline, we are just hearing the kind of reflections and seeing that our narrator is definitely taking us to a place that we don't entirely know what's happening, but they obviously do, or the present day timeline has something to add to the story, whether it's the same thing is happening again, or they are kind of reflecting on how much this impacted their life. And I didn't quite feel like Linda in the present day timeline had that much to offer us as a reader, so I kind of wish that the story had been only about her when she was 14 or 15. But overall, I thought it was a fine novel. I'm glad that I've read it and it's now off my shelves, but it definitely is not going to be a new favorite. So I only give this one 3 stars. It was fine. Didn't particularly love it. Then I've also finished 2 ebooks this month, the first of which is The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGhee. This was an early copy that I got sent through NetGalley that comes out this coming Tuesday, February 16th from One World, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I gave it 5 stars, would absolutely recommend it. It is a nonfiction book that is mainly unpacking and demythologizing the idea of the zero-sum theory, that white people will be negatively impacted by economic and social progress in terms of racial equity. And so throughout this book, Heather McGhee is basically kind of examining that idea in different sectors, from the cost of higher education here in America to the state of our public K through 12 education, to the housing crisis in 2008 and the kind of forces surrounding that, and even to like climate change and air pollution, and how the opposite is actually true, in that racism is negatively impacting everyone, including white people, and sometimes more often white people than non-white people, because there are just more white people in America than non-white people, at least at this point. And in making this argument that racism has a strong negative impact for everyone in America, she uses a number of different research methods, including interviews with a number of different Americans from all walks of life, from people working in Nissan factories in Mississippi all the way to people in Lewiston, Maine, which is currently a hub of immigrants and refugees, particularly from sub-Saharan Africa, such as Somalia and Chad, and the ways that these individual people, many of whom working class white people or middle class white people, have actually realized how much they have gained from interactions and collaborations with non-white people in their communities, and how the wealthy white American elite have created these narratives of separation and otherness, and kind of the pushback against those narratives. So I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I think it definitely does not provide anything super groundbreaking if you are really familiar with ideas of like racial equity through policymaking. I don't think this book is going to provide you with any solutions that you probably haven't already thought about. However, I think the stories that Heather McGhee has collected here from Americans, and then also the statistical and sociological research that she's done to supplement those interviews, is really well done and really powerful. There were definitely moments that I teared up in here thinking about the kind of ways that the elite of America have sought to divide Americans, and how that is a continuing problem that has really started all the way back in the 1600s and continues today. There's definitely a lot in here about the hope that both Heather McGhee has, but also all of the other people that she interviewed, in terms of racial reconciliation and reparations to non-white people in America, and I really appreciated that as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. Definitely one of my favorites of the year so far. I can't wait to get a physical copy the next time I'm in a book buying mood. I've just bought a ton of books for my birthday, so next week I'll be posting a like birthday book haul where you can see the absurd number of books that I've bought. But next time I am buying books, I definitely will try to purchase a physical copy of this one, just because I do think I will want to return to it again and again. Definitely an information heavy read, and I think one that kind of deserves and is best taken at a very slow pace, but I still would thoroughly recommend it, and definitely I think is worth your time. And then finally, the last book that I finished just yesterday was Love at First by Clayborn. This is another early copy that I received through NetGalley that comes out on February 23rd from Kensington Books, and is a romance novel that is kind of enemies to lovers, that follows our 2 main characters, Will Sterling, who's an ER doctor, and Nora Clark, who is an eco-brand web designer, which I think is so just like out there and strange. And I just love that about romance novels, that they sometimes have these professions that are, I guess, real professions, but at the same time you're like, who does that? But anyway, I really enjoyed this one quite a lot. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. Clayborn is one of my favorite romance writers. I really enjoy the way that she writes very quiet, kind of heartfelt moments, but also ties to it a lot of kind of real world angst, but in a very still like lighthearted way. Her books don't feel like that the stakes are all that high, but at the same time her characters are definitely like very real world people in my eyes. So the kind of main premise of this one is that Nora has recently inherited this building that her grandmother used to manage. Her grandmother has recently passed away, and so Nora is dealing with a lot of that grief, as she was really close to her grandmother. And Will has also recently inherited one of the apartments within the complex, which was owned by his uncle, who he had a very strange relationship to because of a lot of negative things that happened in his childhood. So Will is very eager to get rid of the apartment. However, Nora and the other residents of the complex, all of whom are a very tight-knit community and many of whom are very elderly, are actively trying to make sure that Will keeps the apartment by kind of getting up to some shenanigans, and obviously Nora and Will kind of get involved with one another over the course of this like sabotage plan that Nora and some of the other residents have for Will and his plans to make the apartment into a rental property. So I really enjoyed the side cast of characters as well in this one. I think they are super delightful, just super fun, and add a kind of extra layer to this romance that I really enjoyed. Will also has an ER doctor friend who is like very like standoffish, doesn't express a lot of emotions, who also has a lot of the really great lines of the book, because Gerald, the like ER doctor friend, is also attempting to kind of win over his ex-wife because he realizes that he misses her. And so Gerald plays a very nice foil for Will in terms of Gerald being this very standoffish, unemotional person who actually is working much harder than Will to express his emotions and understand the baggage that he's brought to relationships and the kind of ways that he can work through that. So I really appreciated that as well, of showing a kind of different relationship that at times seems healthier than the relationship that Nora and Will are like in the process of during the middle of the novel. So that was another aspect of it that I really enjoyed. And overall, I just think Kate Clayborn writes really fun romances and would highly recommend checking out any of her books. I've read pretty much all of them. I think there's only 2 that I haven't read that I am eager to get to in the near future. So definitely excited that I got an early copy of this one. Definitely enjoyed it. Will definitely be continuing to read Kate Clayborn and whatever she comes out with next. So those are the 5 books that I've read since the start of February. I am currently reading several books, but I will be talking about all of those once I finish them in my end of month wrap up. If you are new to my channel, I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe. I make videos pretty much every Sunday. Sometimes I add an extra video in there, you know, just to spice things up. Additionally, if you've read any of these books and want to talk to me about them down in the comment section below, please do. And I think that's everything. I will talk to you next time. Bye.